This is my journey. Inspired one story at a time, a library of leaders was created. It began as a journey to learn. As time went on, it began to grow. All it needed was a platform, and this podcast was created to listen, to inspire, to share. I am a storyteller, and this is my journey. Welcome to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. I'm your host, Steve Anderson, and today our guest is Ben Braxley, who is a PT DPT, and he is a board-certified neurologic physical therapist. He has been a senior program coordinator, at Emory University Center for Physical Therapy and Movement Science, with nearly 2 decades of clinical experience since earning his doctorate from Emory University in 2006. Dr. Braxley has emerged as a dynamic leader who bridges clinical excellence with strategic advocacy and professional governance. Currently serving as the President of APTA Georgia chapter, Dr. Braxley has been an active member of the Georgia Physical Therapy Association since 2003, holding multiple leadership positions, including Delegate to the APTA House of Delegates. His extensive involvement in professional governance includes chairing APTA's Nominating Committee and serving on various committees at the chapter level for both Georgia and California, and within the Academy of Leadership and Innovation at the Academy of Neurologic Physical Therapy. What distinguishes Dr. Braxley's leadership approach is his commitment to interdisciplinary collaboration in advancing healthcare advocacy. He recently participated in the AMPAC Campaign School in Washington, D.C., which is a vigorous political education program designed by the American Medical Association, where he trained alongside physicians as one of only 2 non-physician health professionals in attendance. This experience has informed his work in developing political education pathways specifically tailored for physical therapists and physical therapist assistants, including his efforts to establish campaign training programs within Georgia's RM Barney Poole Leadership Academy. Dr. Braxley's diverse clinical background spans neurologic rehabilitation, outpatient orthopedics, and specialized populations across Georgia, California, Oregon, and Washington, as well as Rwanda. He has translated this clinical expertise into thoughtful leadership through numerous speaking engagements at national conferences and podcasts. As a recognized expert in both clinical practice and professional affairs, Dr. Braxley brings valuable insights into the intersection of healthcare, regulatory policy, and strategic leadership development. So, Ben, welcome to the program. It's great to have you on today.
Thanks so much, Steve. It's great to be here.
So let's start with a little context. Obviously, we heard in your bio there of many, many things you're doing, but let's just start with some of the basics. Where'd you grow up? Where you went to school and how you got interested in physical therapy.
Oh, that's great. So I'm sitting in Atlanta, Georgia right now in our studio space, and I'm from Atlanta and currently live there, although I grew up in a little town called Milledgeville, Georgia, about 2 hours outside of Atlanta. Our primary claim to fame is that in the movie Pretty Woman, Julia Roberts says she's from Milledgeville, Georgia.
There you go.
But she's not. She's from Douglasville or Smyrna, depending on who you ask. But I grew up in a household. My dad went from working nights in a factory to being a real estate broker and then owning his own real estate agency. And my mom was a social worker. So they were both very much people professions and very social in the way that they like to spend their time and make their living. And so I knew probably towards the end of high school that I wanted to do something similar and that I wanted to focus on people. I thought I wanted to do something in healthcare, but I didn't want to go to school as long as medical school would have me in school. So I started exploring professions. A friend of my dad's was a chiropractor. At that point in time, which was in the 90s, you could actually go into chiropractic school without completing a college degree. And I said, that's not for me. I want to go be a bulldog like my parents, University of Georgia. And ultimately found my way to physical therapy and fell in love with it. Exercise and sports science was kind of the lead in. And I started PT school in 2003. And that was actually the first time I'd ever been the president of anything. I was president of my PT school class. And I'd like co-chaired the pre-PT club and some other things like that at the University of Georgia. But it was kind of my entry point into leadership in the PT space back then. But in terms of general upbringing, small town in the 80s, I'm definitely an 80s kid. I think Stranger Things hits all the right buttons for me for 80s nostalgia. And yeah. And
Now,
then
I got to
PT.
tell you that, for a guy from Georgia and growing up in a small town in Georgia, you don't have much of an accent. Where'd that Georgia accent go?
When I'm around my family, it comes out more. I did have a patient, I did a clinical affiliation in Boston, and he asked me what part of Georgia I was from. So I think it comes out in certain kind of verbiage and regionalisms. And certainly when you're close to family, it comes out more. But Atlanta's a pretty, you get every accent, in the world probably in the city of Atlanta. So I think that kind of neutralized me over time.
Now, it says in the bio too that you've done some work or spent some time in Rwanda. So tell us a little bit about that and how you got into that.
Yeah, no, it was an amazing opportunity. I spent a year between 2014 and 2015. We actually went for my wife's job. We had a 6-month-old baby, and we moved to Kigali, Rwanda, the capital of Rwanda in East Africa, for her to participate in the Human Resources for Health program, which was funded by the Clinton Health Foundation. She's an emergency medicine physician, so she was helping establish kind of the third year of a 5-year program to really establish emergency medicine as a specialty in a country where it didn't exist previously. So as we went there, I said, well, what am I going to do other than hang out with Anara, who's now will be turning 12 in a couple weeks. Wow. And I learned that USAID was sponsoring a program in partnership with health volunteers overseas to advance Rwandan rehabilitation services. And so I contacted HVO and said, hey, I'm going to be in country. I'm a physical therapist. I have my NCS. Do you need any additional teaching assistants? And they said, absolutely. When you get there, we'll be teaching an orthopedic class. You can get to know the instructors. And then right after that, we're teaching a neurologic class. And it would be great if you wanted to participate and teach spinal cord injury. So I found myself preparing lectures to teach what I'd learned at the Shepherd Center, which is a phenomenal center in Atlanta, Georgia, for spinal cord injury and other types of traumatic and other injuries, to about 220 Rwandan physios for a country of 12 million people. So you can imagine that the task was daunting, but it was continuing education, and we had the opportunity to train some Rwandan physios to teach what we were teaching and then co-teach and then leave that information behind for them to continue to teach through the University of Rwanda. So a really cool experience, a great year, really a great time to be in that part of the world.
You still have contact with some of those students and faculty members of that country?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, during my time at Emory, the neuropsychology program was planning to open a neuropsychology program in Kigali at the same university I taught at. So I was able to connect with one of the faculty here in Atlanta to just, honestly, we've only had the initial conversation, but to talk about kind of the lay of the land and the expectations. The lectures that I prepared for spinal cord injury, basically none of it was relevant relative to the situation on the ground when I got there. So it was a good lesson in learning to pivot, and I was able to share that expectation with the neuropsychology program faculty as well.
Okay, so then after that, you come back to the United States, and so, in the bio it talked about you've been in California, Washington, Oregon. How did you get to those states, and then you eventually got back to Georgia, it sounds like.
Yeah, so I'm very good at doing what my wife tells me to do. So it's a valuable life skill wherever you are in life. So we actually did some travel contract work before we went to Rwanda, before we had our first daughter and then subsequently a second daughter. So as it turns out, physicians and physical therapists don't really have similar timelines in terms of travel work. So we took a round of jobs in Portland, Oregon. Then we went up to Bellingham, Washington, which is a great little town, kind of on the map for being a great place to stop and listen to some live music when you're going between Canada and gigs in Seattle. So there were some great live shows there. After that, we came back to Atlanta when our first daughter was born. Quickly moved her to East Africa, much to my parents' chagrin. And then when we came back, we landed in California, first in the East Bay for a year. And then we were in Sacramento for about 6 years after that, which is another great town for music and outdoor activity as well. So that's kind of the lay of the land in terms of the various states and continents that I've practiced on.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm a little west of Seattle in a smaller town called Paulsbo on Hood Canal. And yeah, Bellingham's a great town. Probably before your time because you're a lot younger than I am. But Death Cab for Cutie was kind of the big group out of Bellingham. So
Yeah.
yeah,
No,
yeah,
I'm familiar with that. I saw Ben Gibbard's play not too long ago in Atlanta, so it's
yeah.
good.
Yeah, it's awesome. So now, you've been at Emory University for quite a while. You were at Emory University for a while. You kind of, I think a lot of people in the PT world knew of you as being an Emory University guy, and so now you've stepped away and you're doing something else. So tell us about what your new adventure is here.
Yeah. So for a variety of reasons, I'm very much in the sandwich generation of caring for, relatively small children and then aging parents as well. So I left Emory University where I was helping establish the new Center for Physical Therapy and Movement Science there under George Folk's leadership. He being the director, I was the originator of the senior program coordinator role there. And we were essentially building ties between other institutions and Emory in the physical therapy space as well as movement science more generally. So that touched research, that touched clinical practice, and it touched clinical education as well in partnership with Emory's Division of Physical Therapy and their continuing education program. So really cool opportunity. Love the experience of working there for a year and a half alongside colleagues, many of whom, well, I'll say a few of whom were still faculty back when I graduated in 2006, but they have a great program and a much larger program. When I went to Emory, it was actually just 20 students, which probably contributed to me being able to be elected president now that I reflect back on it. But now their class size is quite a bit larger. I would imagine it's a little bit more stiff competition.
Yeah. So you were only there for a year and a half then. Is that what you said?
Yeah, a year and a half is the senior program coordinator in this stint, but my first role out of physical therapy school was actually working at their geriatric hospital and then at their rehab hospital after that.
Okay. So now what are you doing?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm actually opening, I won't use the word clinic because initially it will not be offering physical therapy services, but I'll be in the fitness and wellness space. There's an amazing evidence-based program called Onero, which comes from the Latin, I believe, for load. Gosh, I hope I get that right. We'll correct it in post if I look it back up
Yeah,
and
no
say it's
worries.
wrong. But it is a osteopenia and osteoporosis intervention, strength training, with some classic Olympic lifts. But it's the idea that we are chronically underloading our skeletal structure for strength as we age. So this is my initial foray into not the neuro space, but into the more wellness, longevity, and to a degree orthopedic space as a physical therapist here in Atlanta. So I will be starting it's going to be the Movement Studio Atlanta, and Movement Studio ATL is our website as I continue to prop it up and begin to lead classes starting in the second quarter of this year.
So obviously you're very well versed and see a lot of what's going on in the PT world, not only in Georgia but nationally. So why this niche? You find something, and obviously you're being a little bit of an entrepreneur here and doing something very unique and different. So what was missing in the world that you needed to do this?
Gosh, I really credit where credit is due. In terms of large national brands in physical therapy, I really, the name that I most appreciate is Upstream Rehab. And so when I think about moving upstream of where physical therapists have traditionally practiced, a lot of it is comfort with movement, passion for movement, confidence with movement. And in the context of there being such just, fantastic evidence for interventions for both sarcopenia or low muscle and osteopenia, which I suppose I should introduce as low bone density. I think it's a great place where physical therapists have the opportunity to help people problem solve and kind of decrease some of the fear and the avoidance if they have some musculoskeletal baggage, which most of us do by the time we're in our 40s, if not before. so that we can live well and age well and continue to thrive into later stages of life, which absolutely should be full of movement and mobility and wellness and all of the above. So I think that is the core of why I'm interested. Another great thing is that just Atlanta has, I'm a big cyclist. I don't know if you can.
I was just going to ask you
can
with that
tell.
wall art there, you must like being on a bike.
I do love being on a bicycle, and so cyclists. I'm going to make a point about Atlanta being, having the climate to ride year round, although it has been rather cold recently.
Yeah.
But there are more people doing year-round bike commuting in like Milwaukee than there are in Atlanta. So I think that for a long time I've been aware that there are physical barriers to mobility in public and in the community, and then there are kind of cultural barriers to mobility and movement. And it's something that I've talked about. I actually considered doing another degree in city and urban planning from a physical therapy perspective, because I think that we have a lot to contribute in that space. So I think that Atlanta is just a perfect population to make people more confident in their movement, to give them permission to move, to load, and to go out and thrive.
So staying on the cycling topic here, I also understand that you have an interest in Paralympic cycling.
Oh,
And
yes, indeed.
so tell us a little bit about how you got interested in that and what do you do in that area?
Well, so I'm now an international paracycling classifier. And so being a neuro PT and liking bicycles, where those two worlds really meet most efficiently is para sport, specifically paracycling. And so, Steve, I'm sure you're familiar with Eric Moen.
Yeah, I was just going to
Yes.
ask if you knew Eric. He's a great guy.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Eric Moen did some early research as a physio, as a PT in bicycle performance and adaptation in space, and he has bikept.com among other brands, and does training for PTs to be comfortable and confident making recommendations about how to adapt the bicycle and how to train the individual to best match with the bicycle. He's been a U.S. classifier for a number of years. He's now the chief of classification for UCI, which is the organization that puts on the Tour de France, among other major international races around the world. So through friendship and Eric's tutelage, I became a U.S. classifier in 2018, and just recently, this past fall, completed my training as an international classifier. So after a year of going to Zurich as a trainee, and then the next year going to Belgium as a trainee, this year I'll get to go to Huntsville, Alabama as a classifier. So it's a funny progression, the way that the venues worked out. But Huntsville's a great city, and I look forward to being there for the World Paracycling Championship this year.
And would you be going to the Olympic Games then next time around?
So it depends. There's a bit of being the newest certified international classifier. There's a bit of a pecking order. I don't know if you're familiar with those, and so it might be a few years before I can go to the Paralympics. But time will tell. It's certainly something that is a passion of mine and a great opportunity to connect the two worlds, two of the worlds that I hold most closely.
Yeah, that's great. You know, you've lived, as we've discussed earlier, in multiple states, and looking from a leadership perspective, I'm just wondering what you see in our profession of physical therapy in those states. You know, Washington, Oregon, California, and Georgia. What's consistent and what's different in the leadership in our profession in those states?
Oh, that's great. Physical therapists and PTAs can be chameleons, right? I mean, we can really reinvent ourselves. Back, I think around 2012, I actually did a session at California's annual conference about the anxieties and decisions of new grad PTs. Like, how do you choose what you want to do? You know, do you have... And I'm sure that's only intensified as the debt load has increased. But I think that the common thread between the states that I was most closely linked to, which I would say would be Oregon, California, and Georgia, would be that they all do things their own way. You know, California, the California Physical Therapy Association, I think would be considered the third largest organization of physical therapists in the world, and yet it's a chapter of the American Physical Therapy Association. That was true at one point in terms of their size scale based on membership. Perhaps another group has replaced them as third. But so they have a staff of 9 full-time employees. They have amazing resources. I think their lobby day was yesterday. APTA Georgia's is this coming Tuesday. So they do things the California way, and they are very good at it, very organized, very inviting. I love landing there after a time abroad, and then gradually getting to do more and be more involved in the California Association. When I think about Oregon, I think about the innovative things that have come out of Oregon. When I was passing through, they did a series that was functional orthopedics for the neuro clinician and functional neuro for the orthopedic clinician. Just like analyzing cases from altering points of view. Just a really phenomenal thing that I think all clinicians would benefit from. And frankly, not just clinicians. I mean, you could do that same, like looking from an administrative standpoint, which would probably be less appealing to a lot of people. But having managed clinics, I would love to see the way other administrators can analyze like a practice, wearing a different hat. It's something that we have to do patient to patient, and it's something that we benefit from observing when we look between populations such as that. And in Georgia, I have to toot the horn of the RM Barney Poole Leadership Academy here in Georgia. That got started, I feel like I'm saying 2012 a lot. This is also something that came out of Georgia in 2012. So we're coming up on soon to be 14 years of having a leadership academy that helps prepare physical therapists and physical therapist assistants to do some of the things that LAMP, the program that used to be through HPA within APTA, but now through the Academy of Leadership and Innovation, to help kind of catalyze leadership and thought.
Yeah, yeah. So now we're going to publish this a little bit further down the road. We're recording it today, but it's going to be published a little later. But as we speak now, you recently just went to the Graham sessions, I understand.
Yes, I
And
did.
so, yeah, so as a if this is okay, as a younger leader, let's say, in our profession, within APTA, what excites you that you see, and what gives you pause? And I'm sure some of those things were brought up at the Graham sessions just last week.
Yeah. So it's really, I'm here. One of the things I'm talking about today is this opportunity to move into the wellness space, to move upstream from the traditional practices of physical therapy. And that was definitely a thread of conversation at the Graham sessions this year. And if you happen to be listening and not know the Graham sessions, Steve is very much the heart of the Graham sessions, even when he's not there, along with Patrick Graham and Roger Herr, who has been to all 19, as I understand it.
Yeah.
So I was really excited about the conversation around primary care physical therapy, which different people there may have different opinions, but the idea of when the physical therapy world talks about direct access, that's not an immediately accessible term to the public, where most members of the public, although not all, would be more familiar with the idea of having a primary care provider or seeing someone first. Just a first responder, I think, is something we've certainly heard a lot coming through COVID. So who's the first responder for musculoskeletal issues? That, I would say, is the idea that I got the most passionate about at the Graham sessions, and that I have the most kind of notes scribbled in a notepad of things that I want to pull further. Also really loved a new thing that happened there this year that was kind of breaking down assumptions about different generations. I think that, and they called it the parallelograms. So the Graham sessions, and it was a parallelogram.
Okay.
And I'm excited to see where that goes in the future. I've actually been in touch with some of the organizers about suggestions for next year, if they want to pivot that instead of generational, looking at some other demographics, so that we are better at facilitating conversation with those that don't, either on paper or in conversation, agree with our points of view.
Well, that's a perfect segue into what I wanted to ask next. So, what advice would you give a baby boomer or a Gen X PT leader, about working with, the newer professionals coming into the profession, and what should we listen to? What should those people react to as far as looking at generations like that?
Yeah, you know, a theme from the session at the Grahams was, you know, it is we use cognitive lattice to kind of navigate the world. Like we can use a framework and we can make generalizations, but no generalization will ever be 100% accurate. So whether it's, you know, a young upstart that's managing, you know, older clinicians, more seasoned clinicians, or the other way around, I think it's, you know, talk to your people. You know, use radical candor, to borrow from Kim Scott's philosophy. You know, care about people and talk to them directly. That's ultimately my takeaway from radical candor. So I think that you'll hear things like, well, you know, newer generation doesn't want to work as hard, or they don't want to work this, you know, hours, but they're very motivated for money. And I think you can have a real conversation about the debt load and why, especially over the last decade and a half, it's harder to find a balance as a new grad when loan payments have started, and you're seeking any life outside of work with job number one, job number two. You know, I have a DPT babysitter. You know, she's a practicing clinician, but still babysits, which I'm very appreciative of. Hi, Christina. But this is the reality that we're in, and I think that she is absolutely someone who works hard and is willing to work in a variety of ways. Although it might not be, you know, additional hours in clinic, it's a conversation to have about, well, what other hours? How else can we contribute? What else are we looking for in terms of career advancement and opportunity?
Well, I've said many times on this program or on previous episodes that I personally hate labels. You know, nothing's worse than being labeled, oh, well, you're this, that means you're that. And if you think this, that means you think that. And, you know, I just hate labels. So the more that we try and label, whether it's generations or whether it's what you feel about spirituality or politics or, you know, whatever it is, you know, as soon as somebody tries to label you, I just think it gets ugly and messy. So I would agree. I think we just need to be open-minded and listen to each other and learn a lot. And anybody who thinks that they can't learn something, I don't care, you know, what stage of life they're in, is wrong, because you can always learn something.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit now. You've worked for, you know, you're going into this new practice, and it's going to be, you know, bare bones to begin with, and it's like a startup. So it's very small, but you've also had work with this large healthcare system in Emory. Um, what did you learn out of that larger system that you think will help you get this new venture started?
That's a great conversation to have, and it kind of dovetails with a number of things that I've done. Prior to coming back to Georgia, I was working for a health system in Sacramento, and I managed PT, OT, speech, and neuropsychology across kind of three locations, two primary locations and one satellite location. And that was coming through the period of COVID, where I thought that as first a supervisor and then a manager, the best thing I could do is try to give my employees more time to focus on their patients. And so I looked at ways to be as efficient as possible with some of the managerial responsibilities, which led me kind of down a data science hole to operationalize and automate as much of the core of what I needed to do organizationally, so that I could then give time back to my clinicians, either saying, hey, do you want to meet with me for an hour? Do you want me to see your patient for an hour? Do you want to co-treat for an hour? You know, what's going to help you kind of replenish? Do you just need an hour for documentation, or is there something else that we can do to help you manage through this period of time? That kind of interest in data science, first I was kind of coding in Excel, and then the organization switched to Google as a platform, so I learned some Google App Script and did some efficiency things, first for my clinics and then for the region a little bit. So that then became my leverage. Actually, George Folk at Emory and I connected because he was doing this reproducible, the program is out of USC, reproducible rehabilitation research, essentially. George was part of that cohort. And I was interested if any clinicians were participating in that program or if it was predominantly researchers. And that led to me taking the role at Emory. To speak to your question, I was looking at how we, as the Center for Physical Therapy and Movement Science, could partner with different emerging technologies to make things that clinicians were already doing more efficient, to give them more time to focus on the things that a machine isn't able to do. So one example would be the gait rate system from researcher Brian Jones at Georgia Tech, which is just a wall-based radar system for measuring gait speed. So you pass one sensor, it starts the clock. You pass another sensor, it stops the clock. Gait speed is a great proxy for overall physical functioning, something that a lot of people do with a stopwatch, and then they scribble it on paper, and then they try to enter it into the EMR later. Could our center facilitate getting that to be instantaneous, streamlined into the EMR? How would that help? Could that be done when a patient checks in for their appointment? Could they arrive in front of you with already some objective data about how they're moving today relative to how they moved at their last session? Is it worse? Do I need to pay more close attention? Do I need to recheck the vitals? What's going on? That type of objectivity is great. There were other technology partners that I worked with. So what I am hoping to do as I build my clinic in Atlanta is actually reach out, not with the power of Emory as a partner behind me anymore, but as an entrepreneur looking from a startup standpoint in a clinic. Can the same technology be incorporated into a non-traditional space, into a fitness space? Is there a value add for the individual that's coming for an osteoporosis or osteopenia exercise program to measure their grip strength? It's something that's going to increase naturally as they hold weights and they participate in exercise, but do they find it useful to have those benchmarks? In the way that we think of it often with our clinical minds, how do we increase the utility at the individual level and then subsequently at the community level?
I think that would be it's going to be a hard step, and hopefully you can do that because I think coming from a large system like that, you're used to having robust systems and EHR exposure and getting all this information, and now starting out in a startup, you can't afford an EHR, so hopefully you're going to use other systems to try and make this thing systematic going forward, but you don't have that robust system. So that'll so hopefully more places like Emory or bigger healthcare systems will help some of the smaller ventures get access to that, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that is the plan, and there's some great examples of startups that end up building their own platform for something, and I'm not talking about a full EHR, but just in terms of data collection and reporting. And a lot of programs now, if there's an exercise system, they want to see where it's being deployed and get as many metrics as possible back for feedback internal to the way that they've created it. So there are some platforms that I hope to leverage as things continue. But I appreciate that the lift when you have a partnership name is recognizable, at least in the Southeast, as Emory is a little bit different than when it's the Movement Studio by Ben. So.
Well, hopefully, and I was going to ask you if you're getting, some support from your colleagues in Emory as you go out, but hopefully it's more collaborative, than competitive. Hopefully they don't look at you as now you're competing with their system. So hopefully they don't look at it that way because I do believe that we need to collaborate more and more within the healthcare system and not look at it competitively. If we're really trying to help people, why are we competing? It should be collaborative, right?
Absolutely. I don't think anyone's making the argument that everyone's doing so well in the community that we don't need more services. We have such a wide variety of challenges right now as a public body that I think that we are kind of in an all hands on deck situation. And the more innovation and the more thoroughly we can disseminate these opportunities for pathways to wellness, the better.
We've talked a little bit today about how different stages of your career and your life, you learn things through leadership. I'm curious, now you said you're a girl dad. So now that you're a father, what leadership things have you learned through that experience that help you professionally?
Oh, that's so great. When we walked my middle schooler to school this morning, but we had to stop, block and a half away so she could do the last bit on her own.
Yeah.
But we talked about the differences between our daughters. This is my wife and I, and how one of the things that I want to do is play more board games, especially with the younger daughter who's in fourth grade now, because she's not good at being not good at something. When she's losing, she's just such like a naturally, and both my daughters are wonderful and wonderfully talented in their own ways. But the younger one just seems to nail every academic thing thrown her way practically from the first try. And so then when she faces opposition in a silly board game, she falls apart more quickly than my perhaps more resilient older daughter. So I think that, I have this idea that I've kicked around for quite a long time. And I don't know that it's exclusively comes into play with parenting, but I think it's something that might speak to you, Steve. And are you familiar with fartlek running? Is that a term that you've ever heard before?
I've heard it, but I probably couldn't describe what it is. So help
Yeah,
me.
so it's a Swedish word. Fart, Swedish, means speed, and lick is play. So speed play running. And it's a training paradigm where someone is the pace setter, and they may sprint ahead, and those in the group have to match that pace. So someone's going to sprint, and they're going to, punish the group and run ahead, and then there will be a recovery mode where that person slows down, and then everyone's in a more restorative pace, and then someone else may blast off the front, and then everyone has to catch up. So it's turn-taking leadership, but with different individuals setting the pace, and then a recovery pace kind of interspersed. And I think of like fartlek almost as a leadership style, like you would think of like democratic or coaching or pace setting. But what I love about it is that, and this is where I think the parenting analogy is fair, is in the areas where my wife is more confident and more expert, she's going to take the lead. And I'm very happy to be in her draft for that. And then in other, helping my daughter, she'd like to do a 30-mile bike ride in North Georgia, part of a kind of gravel race series. And that would be my expertise. And so I'm going to try to take the lead and be the fartlek leader for that section. And it's something that I see in APTA Georgia in a variety of ways too. When it comes to the budget, I'm going to draft behind my treasurer. When it comes to meeting planning, our vice president is amazing, and she's planning a phenomenal impact conference for Georgia. And then we're already talking about a joint conference for Tennessee in 2027. But that's where I am very comfortable to have them lead, and I'm I hope I'm a great first follower to help support their goals and their aims. And then when it comes to maybe like legislative strategy, that might be something where I'm taking the lead and more confident at an organizational level. Um,
I think
I
that's
th-
such a great point, because with leaders, as soon as you think that you're best for everything or that you know everything, it's just not going to work. And, some people may call it delegation, people would call it collaboration, whatever title you put on it. It's just you don't have to be in control and command all the time as the leader, and I think the way you said it makes a lot of sense, how did you say it? First follower, or you're comfortable with that, and and I think more leaders need to embrace that and not feel like they always have to be, out front leading the charge.
Absolutely. I would say that's kind of a trademark of my leadership style is that sometimes I'm in the driver's seat, but I'm quite comfortable, in the passenger seat or the back seat and cheering the driver along. So.
Another point that you made in reference to your girls, and I've believed this, you know, forever, is that you can't treat everybody the same. They have different personalities, they have different tolerances, they have different resiliency, they have, and so to get to know your people, obviously, your daughters, but to get to know your people really well, and then lead accordingly to what they respond to best is going to be different. And I do think that some people say you got to treat everybody the same or it's going to be unfair. I just don't believe that because I don't think it works.
I agree. And I think that would be endorsed by certainly the conversation recently at the Graham sessions in terms of gen-intelligence is the way it was framed, but generational intelligence
Yeah.
is, no one is monolithic in their, alignment with some of these stereotypes, and everyone needs an individual approach. Again, sometimes these cognitive shortcuts can help to an extent, but once you lean on them too hard, they collapse right away.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So now, are you still the president of Georgia APTA?
Yes.
Okay, so how did you, I'm curious as to, is that something like I want to get involved and someday I want to be the president? Or did one day you just kind of realize, oh my gosh, I'm the president? Tell me how that happened.
Yeah. So we've already touched on the fact that when I got to PT school, I wanted to try on leadership, and even through emails with my class, like I expressed interest as we were coming to Atlanta to do this thing together so many years ago. And I remember being in one of the first classes and learning about the structure of APTA at the time, and I learned that, gosh, at the time, I think there were maybe around 15,000, maybe it was 18,000 PT students all over the country. I think we've at least doubled
Hmm.
by now in terms of students. And within the House of Delegates, which for those that don't know is the American Physical Therapy Association's deliberative body, there was just one voice for those 18,000 students, where Georgia has currently like 9 delegates to the House of Delegates. At the time, there was only one speaking voice, the student physical therapist delegate. And when I saw that on the sheet of paper, I said, I want to be that voice, or I want to be able to talk to the person
Yeah.
that carries that voice. And ultimately, it was fortuitous. The CSM that year was in Nashville. My grandmother lived in Nashville, so a classmate and I went up. I participated or I attended the specialist swearing in for a new batch of, OCS and NCS and all the physical therapy specialties, and that led me to say one day I'm gonna get my specialization. I wasn't even sure what at that point, but it was an inspiring moment. The next student conclave, back when there were student conclaves, was also a drive from Atlanta. So I ended up being the student delegate to APTA, and that opened a lot of doors. Being involved in the student assembly and getting access to amazing mentorship and leaders. Steve Levin was one of my early mentors. Sharon Dunn. Obviously being from Georgia, Barney Poole and Stuart Platt, there were a lot of really phenomenal people kind of in my ear from the early days about what was possible. In terms of becoming APTA Georgia president specifically, I actually considered vice president and wanting to be that first follower for someone.
Mhm.
Then came to understand that it was a bit more meeting planning, and that maybe is not as well suited to my attention span or background. So they were able to convince me to run for president, and I'm certainly thankful that I was able to run alongside a friend for the role. And he's currently the leader of the RM Barney Poole Leadership Academy as I continue my term as president. And so we're doing some great collaboration there as well. I will, I'll go back, the student assembly days ended up leading to me being slated for APTA nominating committee back in 2011. And when I was elected to APTA's nominating committee, it was actually the week that I turned 30. And so I was the youngest elected leader within APTA ever. And I
Wow.
don't think it's been broken yet at the time. Not as a point of pride necessarily, but just as a point of information. I look forward to seeing another leader in their late 20s, potentially, being prepared and ready to lead in that regard. So part of the reason I go into that story is that I love the profession. I love what we do as physical therapists and physical therapist assistants, but I also like the community that can invite people in to go from, sitting in a classroom, learning about the structure to being an elected leader within that organization in a 7-year span is pretty remarkable. And I don't know that there are many other places where you can find those sorts of opportunities.
Well, before we started talking today, I can't say I know you well, although I've known of you. And I would just say that you're probably more like me in a way, and I've said this before, is a reluctant leader. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean it that you don't go out there and say, okay, I'm gonna be the boss of this and I'm gonna do this, where it's more like, and I hope this doesn't sound too ego, but you and I probably have to be careful because when we do things, I think we're good at relationship building and leadership skills, and so people just want us to lead. And so, you have to be a little strategic about it because, you can't lead everything and you can't have too many jobs. So, that's the way I kind of look at it. It kind of seems like maybe hearing your story that it's a little bit been that way for you too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm acutely aware of that too, that various people have ideas of what a leader looks like. And it's part of why I am a passionate follower, and why I encourage a variety of people to both be in my ear when I hold the role, but also to hopefully be enough of an ally that when they are in the leadership role with my support, that they're willing to have me in their ear as well.
Reminds me, speaking of cycling, a little side story here. So I belonged to a neighborhood cycling team. And so during the week, we would have our usual, run out in the morning and run back type of thing, that we do before work. But on Saturdays, we'd take a longer ride. And so everyone would congregate at the meeting spot. And then, everyone would say, okay, where do you want to ride today? What's the route? And in my role as CEO of my company, I was just so tired of having opinions and saying we should do this and whatever. I don't think in like 10 years I ever once said I think we should do this route. I just went along with whatever everybody said. I'm fine with that. So I do think you know delegating and letting other people lead and doing that is refreshing in a way too.
Yeah, I think that I'm very much a collaborative leader. So I want to give time for other people to make their opinions heard, and support them. I'm seldom the smartest person in the room, so it's great when I can get the others talking and then ride their coattails.
For sure. So another thing that I'm curious about, talking about leadership and the PT profession, you're married to a physician. And so she's going to look at things in a probably different way and a different idea and whatever. What have you learned from that, close relationship as far as the way that you lead in the PT profession?
Yeah. So I've met a number of PTs that are married to emergency medicine physicians. So for whatever reason, emergency medicine and PT kind of goes hand in hand. I did my wilderness first responder training years and years ago, and I used to joke that I was like her trauma sous chef. I could prepare things, kind of tee her up, and she'd be able to take it from there. She has a large role in her organization. She's actually the director of emergency department operations for the country, with her company, which is Vituity, which is a democratic partnership, and has hospitalists and emergency department and intensivist contracts all over the place. So we probably spend way too much time talking about healthcare, honestly. Whether it's in the emergency medicine, I've gotten all sorts of thoughts from her on emergency department physical therapy, which she is a huge fan of. And when we were in Sacramento, she actually advocated strongly to my boss at the time to get shifts for physical therapists in the emergency department. So I think we all see the writing on the wall of we're not doing a great job nationally at taking care of people. And certainly in emergency medicine, it's a regular stream of people that lack access to care elsewhere. Mm-hmm. This pushes me into that wellness space, wanting there to be alternative pathways to musculoskeletal care other than an ER, other than an urgent care, before you need it, essentially, before you have no other choice than to pursue it in the emergency department, I should say. So we spend a good deal of time kind of rehashing that, looking at longevity medicine. She's a huge follower of Peter Attia and the outlive philosophy. And it's wonderful. I think that there are so many opportunities for physical therapy to do more in a paradigm that shifts us to an outlive-based approach to maintaining our health and improving our health.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Ben, in anticipation of our discussion today, what haven't I asked you or what haven't we gone into that you'd like to get into the program today?
Fun question. I think we covered a lot of ground, honestly. Like I enjoy getting to kind of tell parts of my story of traveling around the United States first and then taking things internationally. I'm thankful for all the opportunities and mentors that I've had through that time. We touched on paracycling. You're really good at pulling out like the things that people are most passionate about, because between family, paracycling, moving around the country for leadership opportunities, that's honestly the highlights. How about you? Is there anything you wanted to ask a follow-up question about?
No, I think I've covered what I had in mind, and just to answer your question, I do pride myself in research, but I also have secret weapons out there that I can access and say, Ben better than I do, so what should I ask him? So I have some help with that. But anyway, it's all good.
That's
So
great.
at this point in the interview, I always ask my guests the same common question. That question is, in relation to leadership, what is a pearl of wisdom that you could leave us with today?
Yeah, I would say don't be afraid to pivot from being the leader to being the follower. You know, you can be co-lead if that suits you, but let someone else step forward. Learn from the way that they follow you, learn from the way you follow them, and you'll only make, whether it's an organization or a partnership or a family, stronger. We give our kids time to take the lead, and certainly my wife and I take turns leading throughout our busy lives and the frenetic pace of kind of modern life. So I think that the more leaders in the kitchen, the better. And being able to do that respectfully and collaboratively is a wonderful thing.
I love your answer. I think that is great. I couldn't agree more. I haven't ever heard it presented that way to that question. So I commend you for that great response, because I agree that, what I've always said, that my main goal as a leader is to help other leaders learn and grow. That's what I want to do. That's where my passion is. And then when it comes to the point where you basically sponsor somebody to take the lead and then you be one of the followers, that's a big step. And I think that not all leaders are always willing to do that, but the ones that do, I think, get a lot of reward. And plus, they're preparing their organizations for a more shared, as you said, collaborative leadership style, which only can help the organization, because as you said and I said earlier, not everyone has all the answers, not everyone can do everything. So
Well said, Steve. Thanks for your time.
yeah,
This was a blast.
well, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Um, you're being a great leader in our profession. I've heard your name a lot, as a rising star, and I think that star has risen, and so you're doing great things for our profession. So keep it up. I appreciate your view on what we need to do in the future, and with good leaders like you, I think our future's strong. So thanks for being on the show today. I appreciate it very much.
Excellent.
And hopefully we'll meet face to face at the Graham sessions next year. I did miss a year this last year, and it really pisses me off because Roger, her, and I were always the two guys that had been to every single one, and now that I've missed, he's going to win the award. So I guess I'll give it to him. But I'm going to plan to be there next year. So
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I hope to see you there. And, hey, we can sabotage his shoelaces or something.
there
Keep him
you go.
from walking in first.
There you go. Okay, Ben. Thanks. Have a good rest of your day, and hope to see you down the road.
Sounds great, Steve. Take care.
Take care. Bye bye. Thank you for listening to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. To listen to all my interviews, subscribe to Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and many other popular podcast platforms. Some of these interviews are on video, and you can search YouTube for Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson. You can also access the entire library of interviews on my website, orange.coaching.com, and that is orangetheword.coaching.com, and go to the Media Center and click on Podcasts or Video Gallery. You can also enter the website from pilpodcast.com.